history of the Moravians. Some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not, but this group that was referred to by the Hausers when they were here Wednesday night are a exemplary missions organization that the Lord raised up several hundred years ago that carried the gospel to a lot of the known world at that time. In 1 John 4, verse 9, it says, "In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. Herein is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be a propitiation for our sins." You know, God, the Bible says that God is love. And in another verse, I think is in the prior chapter, it says, in chapter 3, it says, "Hereby we perceive that we, the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren." And in another place, it talks about that he lays, verse 14 says, "We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren." And there's the other verse, and I'm not looking at it right here. No, it's probably right under my nose. Where it is. Chapter 4, verse 4. No, that's not the verse. The one where he says that here in his love that you lay down your life for someone else. But anyway, the Moravians were a group that put their money, you'd say, where their mouth is, put their life where their profession of faith was. And they're one of the greatest examples of that in church history. And the Moravians came out of Germany, or actually they started in an area of like the Czech, would call it the Czech Republic today, Czechoslovakia, right on the German border. The area that Hitler invaded in World War II, the Sudetenland that it was called in prior to World War II. Yeah. Would dare to die? Yeah. And there's many verses that talks about the sacrifice and laying down his life, and that, verse 1 John 4:9 that I read a minute ago says, "In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him." Well, the Moravians, in another place it says, "As the Father has sent me, even so send I you." That great verse that's often referred to in missions is God sent his Son, and his Son sent us, to go. And, in praying together with the men, we were talking about this couple's going to Germany. And I think it's kind of interesting that they're going as missionaries back to the land and to the areas not far from where the great missions efforts that came out of Europe years ago, around the time when the old King James Bible was was coming out. Not that they used it, they were Germans, but they, at that very time, they're sending them back, missionaries back in to that. And but the history of it, and when we were at the other church years ago, I can remember one year that they talked on the Moravian Church, and filled in some blanks that I had in my knowledge of the Moravians. But I shared Wednesday night when we were here that my first encounter with the Moravians was on an airplane flight to Latin America, and sat in a seat next to a mixed race young man who was not black, not white, kind of a brown colored. He had the kinky hair, and I was reading my Bible, and he starts witnessing to me. And I found out that he was a Moravian. Well, I didn't know what a Moravian was, and he basically told me, the history of how that the Moravians came to Central and South America and the Caribbean, and then later I had the exposure with more of that. But it came, if you know church history, there's a man by the name of Jan Huss, or Haas, depending on how you pronounce it, way back as far as the 1400s, that was kind of the beginning of that movement. They weren't called Moravians at that time. They were called, in a derogatory sense, Hussites. But he was one who was executed by the Roman Catholic Church at the Council of Constance, and declared a heretic for, God forbid, he taught justification by grace through faith alone. Okay, so and this is long before Martin Luther. Okay, and so Jan Huss taught justification by grace through faith alone. He taught against the indulgences that the Catholic Church used to sell for remission of sins. He taught against purgatory, and a whole series of things that he was declared a heretic by the Roman Catholic Church. And so that's really where as you go roll it back, where it came from. Now, his followers, like I said, were derogatorily called Hussites and were persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church. And later, they went by several names. The other one was a Bohemian Brethren. Bohemian Brethren. They eventually came to be known as the Moravians, okay? But this, which literally means unity of the brethren. And so, coming out of the area of what was Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, this Bohemian area, which is the southeastern part of Germany, and they spread out from there, but they were persecuted throughout from the 1400s through the 1700s by the Roman Catholic Church. And that was the period of time where, Martin Luther broke away from the Roman Church and put his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg church, and all that stuff went on if you study that church history. But in that same period of time, these Moravians existed and were persecuted by the Hapburgs, okay, which were aligned with the Roman Catholic Church. They were the Habsburg kings that were aligned with Rome. And so they were persecuted. Well, they took refuge on an estate called Berthelsdorf, which was owned by Count Nikolaus Ludwig von Zinzendorf. Okay? And he was the guy that gave them refuge on his property. And they established a settlement there, and he protected them in an area of Germany called Saxony. Now, some people, when you hear Saxon, you think of England. But Saxony at that time was in Germany. And so that takes you to about the early 1700s. And the Moravian Church, or the Unity of the Brethren, this group, came there, and they established off of his property a few miles away a settlement called Herrnhut. Okay? And if you're familiar with the Moravians, that name will probably ring a bell too. Now, our friends up here to the north a few miles, this, quote, missionary organization in Grandview, they have purchased an apartment complex which they have renamed Herrnhut. If you go on Red Bridge Road between 71 Highway and head west, you will pass the prayer room, and beyond the prayer room on the left-hand side is this apartment complex that they have renamed Herrnhut. And so the folks there have taken a page or a model of the Moravians and renamed and have borrowed that name. But these folks in Germany at that time that were given refuge by von Zinzendorf and that group, they established basically with a biblical background. They focused on prayer, another page taken, praise and worship, music, personal piety, okay, and sent out missionaries. So that whole effort up there in group is borrowed some of that symbolism and names and all that. Of course, they've having visited that and observed it from afar, they've also taken some pages out of things like Scientology and put it together with it, you know. But at least in my opinion. But that's here and there. The Moravians did. They were men of prayer. They had prayer going 24/7, 365. It went uninterrupted for like 150 or 200 years. I don't remember the period of time, but for a long time it went uninterrupted. They sent missionaries around the globe. Like I said, the guy that I ran into in the plane back, which was probably around 2000 or something like that. I can't remember the time frame when I was traveling there. But he was a product of their missions efforts there. When we were going back to visit Jeff and Jessica in Pennsylvania, when they lived up there, we went to a city and town not far from them in Allentown called Emmaus. And in Emmaus, there is still a Moravian work, school, whatever you want to call it. Now, they're a long shot from what they used to be, okay? But there is still some remnants of it in Pennsylvania. But within a 30-year period, they sent out, as I recall, I can't remember the exact numbers, but over like a 30-year period, they sent out like 700 missionaries. And they sent them to the Caribbean, they sent them to Central America, North America, South America, North, the Arctic, Africa, Far East. They just sent missionaries around the world, okay? And they were an example of that. And the great missionary and the great awakening and all that, and the missionary efforts that came after this, the old book was published in 1611. The Moravians were going out. They were German speaking and they had a German Bible, okay? But the English speaking world, following their example and their dedication and sacrifice, took the gospel around the world, in that same period of time. The Moravians that came to the United States went for the Indians, okay? They worked in the area of Pennsylvania with the Delaware tribe, and they worked their way westward, and they made their way as far as Kansas, coming across that period time in history with going to the Indians. In Latin and Central America, they were going to the native peoples of Latin America and to the slaves that were being hauled in. And the stories involved in that. Now, one of those stories had to do with two Moravians, and I'm going to read this text because I've heard this before. It says, 2 young Moravians heard of an island in the West Indies where an atheist British owner had 2,000 to 3,000 slaves. The owner of the land said, "No preacher, no clergyman will ever stay on this island. If he's shipwrecked, we'll keep him in a separate house until he has to leave, but he's never going to talk to any of us about God. I'm through with all that nonsense." 3,000 slaves from the jungles of Africa brought to the island in the Atlantic where to live and die without hearing of Christ. 2 young Moravians heard about it, sold themselves to the British planter. As the ship left its pier in the river in Hamburg and was going out into the North Sea, carried with the tide, the Moravians had come from Herrnhut to see these 2 lads off, never to return again. For this wasn't a 4-year term. They sold themselves into a lifetime of slavery. The families were there weeping, for they knew that they would never see them again. They wondered why they were going and questioned the wisdom of it. As the boat drifted out, the young boys saw the widening gap, and one lad, with his arm linked through the arm of his fellow, raised his hand and shouted across the gap. The last words were heard from them were these: "May the Lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering." Sold themselves into slavery. That's not the only account. There was the memoirs of Robert McShane, Robert Murray McShane. He was a young Presbyterian preacher in early 1800s. He wrote this. He says, "The most striking example of self-devotedness in the cause of Christ, which I have ever heard of in these days of deadness." And I thought, if that was the days of deadness, what about today? Was told here last week by an English minister. It has never been printed, and therefore I will relate it to you just as I heard it, to stir up our cold hearts that we may give ourselves to the Lord. The awful disease of leprosy still exists in Africa. Whether it be the same leprosy as that is mentioned in the Bible, I do not know, but it is regarded as incurable and so infectious that no one dares to come near the leper. In the south of Africa, there is a large leper house, Lazar house, it says it here, for lepers. It is an immense space enclosed by a very high wall and containing fields which the lepers cultivate. There is only one entrance, and it is strictly guarded. Whenever anyone is found with the marks of leprosy upon him, he is brought to this gate and obliged to enter in, never to return. No one who enters in by that awful gate is ever allowed to come out again. Within this abode of misery, there are multitudes of lepers in all stages of the disease. Dr. Halbeck, a missionary of the Church of England, from the top of a neighboring hill, saw them at work. He noticed two particularly sowing in the field. The one had no hands, the other had no feet, these members being wasted away by the disease. The one who wanted the hands, who lacked the hands, was carried by the other who wanted who lacked the feet upon his back. And he carried in his hands the bag of seed and dropped a pea every now and then. And when the other passed under the ground with his foot, so they managed the work of one man between the two. How little we know of the misery that is in the world. Such is the prison house of disease. But you ask, who cares for the souls of the hapless inmates? Who will venture to enter in at this dreadful gate, never to return again? Who will forsake father and mother? Two Moravian missionaries. Two Moravian missionaries, impelled by divine love for souls, have chosen this Lazar house as their field of labor. They entered in, never to come out. I am told that as soon as these die, other Moravians are quite ready to fill their place. Ah, my dear friends, may we not blush and be ashamed before God that we, the redeemed with the same blood and taught by the same Spirit, should yet be so unlike these men in vehement, heart-consuming love to Jesus and the souls of men. In response to that, a guy after reading McShane's account says, I visited a leper colony one time. This is a guy by the name of Robert Sumner. He says, I visited the leper colony one time, about an hour's drive into the jungle of Manaus, about 1,000 miles up the Amazon. Changed the scene from Africa to Brazil. I visited a leper colony one time, about an hour's drive up the jungle of Manaus, about 1,000 miles up the Amazon. The pastor had been cured, and thereafter a cure, you could leave. His wife, however, was a hopeless case, and he refused to leave because he wouldn't leave her. That was love too. Those are a couple of the accounts, and there are volumes of accounts of the accounts of the Moravian missionaries. In the United States, they went to the Indians. In the Caribbean and the Latins and South America and the Caribbean, they went into the places where the slaves were. As those accounts that I just read, some of them sold themselves into slavery, never to come out again. Some of them, like the African account, entered into a leper house to minister until they died there, only to be replaced by others. That was the legacy, if you will, of the Moravians. Now, the stories are many, and the accounts, like I said, they have volumes of documentation on the stories of the Moravians. There's a pastor that you may know. I think he recently passed away, by the name of John Piper. He used to be the pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church up north of here, Minneapolis, I believe it was. And he is an author and stuff. You can buy his books. But he spoke and preached on this, a message that evidently is online. I haven't listened to it. Entitled, "Doing Missions When Dying is Gain." Doing mission where dying is gain. And so anyway, the Moravians basically came to this country with the early settlers, and took the gospel to the Native Americans in the North America, to the native peoples in Central and South America, to the East, to the North, to Africa, and literally, like I said, they were one of the exemplary groups that spawned the great age of missions. So I thought it was interesting, that we had that couple here the other night that were going back to Germany, and they were invoking the name of the Moravians, going back to the same land where they came out from. But we're in a day, if Robert Murray McShane refers to the deadness of society in the 1700s, he would just turn over in his grave to see the deadness today. Yeah. But anyway, I won't keep you any longer. I just wanted to give you a little of the background. And I've read other accounts in the past, and I've had, like I said, there's a lot of stuff on the Moravians that you can find if you want to study it. But if you had not heard of them, that's who they are, and they were an exemplary organization, or exemplary people, and it's simple. They believed in prayer. They believed in the Word of God. They believed in personal piety, which is basically holiness. That to live for the Lord and to give yourself for others, and the urgency to get the gospel message to men and women that don't know Christ. And it's 180 degrees off of what we see today. Like I say, I don't know this young couple from Adam. It was interesting to me. It was a blessing to see them come in here I know that Ruckman's old school. He's 90 years old or something, you know. The young man comes in here dressed in a suit with a white shirt and tie on a Wednesday night, and it was like a 40-year throwback to me to independent Baptist missions of years gone by. You know, they're young, they're green. The devil's going to attack them. We know it. I know it. If you know the Lord very long, you know it. They have a crosshair put on them. They just got married. That in itself will test them, you know. And she was a beautiful young girl, sweet, gorgeous voice, talented. You know, God can use all that. But make no mistake, the devil will have his crosshairs on them. You know? And they're going into a very hard field. Now, no doubt about it, different generation. But just like it's hard here, let me tell you, in Germany, it's hard. It's a hard field. You know, it's a hard field. And it's like, like religion there is just a cultural thing, you know. I mean, you got people that go that are professing Roman Catholics and professing Lutherans. You know, his little prayer card out there in the lobby, you know, it shows the demographic of Germany, 32 or 33% Roman Catholic, 32 or 33%, quote, Protestant. And I'll tell you that most of that 32 or 33 Protestant is Lutheran, which is Catholic light, you know. And Baptists are a cult in Europe, okay? Bible believers are considered a cult, you know. They're in for, if they don't know it, I trust that, you know, they've been prepared and taught and coached and they're going over there to a missionary. But they need prayer. They need prayer. I pray, my prayer is that they are sincere and dedicated, and as the Moravians that we read about, you know. But they're going back into a land that was once fervent with the gospel, you know, and has long since gone cold. You know. Can the Lord use them in the last gasp to reach a few? Let's pray that He does. But they're going to need prayer. And yeah.
Churches, little spots of churches throughout the world, America or anywhere in the world, that just knuckle down and say, Christ. The whole church had it.
Yeah.
And this is something that we could do. Things like 24-hour prayer, things like
Yeah.
That's something that, when you look at that model, that's something history. It just,
So
often a big work like that, look at it and go, wow, that's neat, we'll never be like him, but no, that's not so. You look at a big work like that, as long as God, if you trust the Lord, read the book, keep it simple. You say
Well, you know, you,
Church can be, we can make this, people in this church trust in the Lord. There's really no limit to what God can do with this little church.
you need to look no further than the New Testament to really see, you know, the church at Philippi is arguably was the Apostle Paul's favorite church. You know? It was small. It was poor, you know. It was, I mean, when you look at the people that were there, you know, you had a rich Jewish businesswoman by the name of Lydia, a seller of purple. You had the Philippian jailer. You had a demon-possessed or devil-possessed girl that was delivered, you know. I mean, you look at the you know, we talk about being a motley crew. Look at the motley crew at Philippi, you know, with what is revealed, you know. It was a Roman colony. There was probably soldiers there, you know. And yet, that was the little church that first gave themselves unto the Lord, and then unto them by the will of God. Well, the Moravians gave themselves unto the Lord, literally. You know, you sell yourself into slavery. I'd say that's all in. You know, you go into a leper colony that you know that when you walk through that door, you ain't coming out again. You know, and you have two that says we're going in there. There's, you know, hundreds, maybe thousands of people that don't know the Lord, and we're going in there, and we know we can't come out. And when we die, there's two others that are ready to go back in too. I mean, that's unheard of. You know, just literally unheard of. Yeah, Philippi was, you know, we sing that little song, little as much when God is in it. You know, that's not an excuse. We need to do everything we can to reach our world, those, minister to those that God gives us. But when you look at the scheme of things in the New Testament, like I say, you need to look no further than Philippi, because Paul says, you know, his longing to be with them, their fellowship in the ministry. You know, what's our name? Lighthouse Ministry Fellowship. There was a sweet fellowship he had with the Philippians. They had great love. They had great fellowship, and they had great charity. Okay? They gave to him time and again. They gave to their power, it says, and beyond their power. You know, I've been blown away, you know, in this little church with a little handful of people, that some of the people that you think would be the least likely to sacrifice just blows me away. Blows me away. Oh, that God would give us a group of people here that are willing to give themselves unto the Lord, that are all in.